By the time August Rourke heard the boy say it, the church basement already smelled of boiled coffee, wet wool, and the kind of shame decent people tried to hide under him singing. The boy had his back to the stove, one arm braced in front of a thin little girl with a torn blue ribbon, the other keeping a sleepy child tucked behind his coat. He could not have been more than 11, though he stood with the hard, square stillness of somebody who had spent too long trying to look older than God had made him. A woman from the Ladies' Aid had just told him to step forward where folks could see him better. The boy did not move. Then August crouched beside him, more from habit than intention, and asked, quiet enough that the others would not hear, "Why are you hiding back here?" Turned over in her sleep and thumped one heel softly against the wall. Della drew back first, not from fear, but because she had learned that the difference between hunger and steadiness often lay in whether a person rushed the thing she most wanted. Emmett let his hand fall away and looked down at the broken chimney glass as if it had interrupted something he had been expecting for some time and still did not quite know how to meet. "I'll fetch another from the pantry shelf," he said. She nodded, though her pulse had gone quick and uneven. "I bought 2 in town for that very reason." He glanced at her then, and there was a look in his face she had not seen before. Not surprise, recognition, as if some private doubt had been answered. By March, the roads had softened enough for formal papers to come through from Laramie and Rock Springs. Reverend Baines rode out with the packet wrapped in oilcloth and his spectacles slipping down his nose. Della stood at the kitchen table while he read the clerk's language aloud, which made everything sound colder than it was. Temporary guardianship was made permanent. Tansy Holt, Nels Bergeron, and Minna Ruiz were legally placed under the care of Della Rusk of Cottonwood Crossing, County of Fremont, Territory of Wyoming. When he finished, Della did not speak at once. She looked at the names on the page. 3 children who had nearly been scattered like straw in a high wind. 3 children who had once belonged to nobody sturdy enough, on paper, to keep them. It struck her then that love had done most of the work, but law, when it finally behaved itself, could be a kind of shelter too. Nels broke the silence first. "Does that mean no one can come and fetch us?" Reverend Baines folded his spectacles. "Not unless Miss Rusk loses her senses and volunteers you back." Minna, sitting on the floor with a wooden spoon and 3 clothespins for company, looked up. "We stay." Della crouched beside her and smoothed the hair from her forehead. "Yes, honey, we stay." Tansy stood very still, fingers pressed hard against the edge of the table. Her eyes did not fill. That was not her way. But after Reverend Baines left, she went out to the back steps and remained there so long Della followed her with a shawl. The meadow was greening in patches. Snow still held in the shaded draws, but the creek had begun to talk again, quick and bright over the stones. Tansy accepted the shawl and wrapped it around her shoulders without looking up. "I kept waiting to hear the word, but did not trust it till today." "What word?" "Stay." Della sat beside her. "I should have said it plainer sooner." Tansy gave a little breath that might have become a laugh in easier children. "You said many things plainer than most people do." After a while she added, "I know you are not my mother." "No," Della said softly. "I know. But if somebody asked me," Tansy said, still looking out over the field, "I think I would not much care what word they used, so long as they meant you." That one struck deeper than tears would have. Spring work came in hard and welcome. Calving, fence repair, harness mending, seed to be put into the kitchen patch. Life has a way of dragging sorrow into motion if you let it, and motion sometimes does for healing what silence cannot. Della worked beside the others where she could, and within the house where she must. She kept accounts straight enough that Emmett stopped checking them twice. She learned which cows would kick, which hens hid eggs in the nettles, and which ranch hands could be trusted to remember an errand all the way from the barn to the porch. Louise taught Nels to coil rope without snarling it. Otto, pretending reluctance all the while, carved Minna a whistle from willow wood. Clay let Tansy read his letters from a sister in Nebraska, though she had to correct his spelling before he sent them back. Little by little the place adjusted itself around the new shape of the household, the way a riverbank gives a little after flood and then holds. As for Emmett and Della, they did not speak of the lantern chimney. But there are silences that mean absence, and there are silences that mean a thing is growing roots where nobody can yet see them. This was the second kind. He began bringing her small practical offerings from town. A finer needle for mending leather, Peppermint drops for Minna, a blue ribbon, because Tansy had once paused half a second too long by the dry goods shelf and thought no one noticed, a packet of garden seeds with the picture rubbed off. Della returned the language in her own fashion. His shirts no longer lost buttons. His coffee was waiting before dawn on branding days. The tear in the lining of Alma's old coat was repaired so neatly he had to search for the seam to find it. One evening in late April, when the sky still held light after supper and the frogs had begun in the creek bottoms, Emmett came in with a cut above his eyebrow and blood down one side of his face. Della was on her feet, so quickly her chair tipped backward. "What happened?" "Nothing heroic," he said, though he sat when she pointed him toward a chair. A gate chain snapped. The post end came round. Nels hovered in the doorway with horrified admiration. Minna tried to climb straight into Emmett's lap until Tansy caught her back by the shoulder. Della cleaned the cut while he held still under her hand. It was not deep, but head wounds always bled too much, and by the time she was done her apron was spotted and Emmett's face had gone thoughtful in that far-off way men sometimes wore when being cared for against their better habits. "You may say it," she told him. "Say what?" "That it is a scratch, and I am making a sermon out of it." "I was going to say your hands are steadier than the doctor's in town." "Well, that only means the doctor enjoys whiskey too much." The children laughed, even Nels. Emmett's mouth curved at one corner. Then Minna, who had been studying the bandage with solemn concentration, asked the question all children ask the moment a house begins to feel safe enough for it. "Is Miss Della staying forever?" No one moved. The room held the warm smell of stew and lamp oil. Outside, a horse stamped in the barn. Tansy looked down instantly, as if she had no right to hear the answer. Nels stared at Emmett. Minna waited with her whole heart showing. Della set the cloth aside and said carefully, "That is a large word." Minna considered this. Big words can still be true. From anybody older, it might have sounded arranged. Coming from a child who still put shoes on the wrong feet some mornings, it landed with all the blunt force of innocence. Emmett rested his forearms on his knees and looked not at Minna but at Della. "I would like her to." The children were suddenly very still, as though one more careless sound might frighten the truth back into hiding. Della felt heat rise along her throat. All winter she had thought of this man in careful portions, never allowing herself to eat the whole thought at once. His steadiness, his reserve, the old hurt in him that had made room for gentleness instead of bitterness. The way he never took credit for decency, as if it were simply work he had been assigned. Yet she was no girl to be dazzled into foolishness. She knew what a household cost. She knew what promises could turn into if made out of loneliness instead of conviction. "So would I," she said, "if the wanting is for the right reasons." Emmett stood then, slow because Minna was still between them, and answered with the same plainness that had first caught her on the hotel porch. "It is not because I need a housekeeper. You have already made yourself more than that. It is not because the children make a picture people approve of. I care nothing for pictures. It is because the best part of my day is the sound of your step in this house, and because when trouble came, you stood in it with me instead of behind me." Nobody breathed. Della had no defense prepared for honesty laid down that clean. Minna, sensing only that the room had become serious in a way likely to delay dessert, whispered loudly to Nels, "I think this is the important part." Even Emmett laughed at that, and the spell softened enough for living souls to remain inside it. Della looked at the children. Tansy trying not to hope too hard. Nels openly hoping. Minna beyond subtlety entirely. Then she looked back at Emmett. "If I say yes," she said, "it will not be as a guest who may be thanked and sent on. I am tired of temporary things." His answer came without pause. "So am I." That was not a grand proposal. There was no ring produced from a vest pocket, no kneeling, no witness but 3 children and a cat under the stove. Yet everyone in that kitchen knew what had been set in place all the same. They married in June under the cottonwoods by the creek because Minna declared the parlor too stuffy for vows, and, for once, no one found reason to disagree with her. Reverend Baines performed the service. Mrs. Copley brought a cake heavy as a paving stone and twice as sweet. Luis wore his best silver conchos. Otto shaved. Clay cried in secret behind the barn and denied it when confronted. Mrs. Weller came too. She stood apart at first in a hat trimmed more grandly than the occasion required, then approached Della after the vows while the others were passing dishes and minding children. I have said small things in a small town, she said, smoothing her gloves though the day was warm. There is no graceful road back from that. But if grace is not available, plainness must do. I was wrong. Della had imagined such a moment, in her harder hours, and thought it would feel triumphant. It did not. It felt human, tired and imperfect and better than stubborn pride. Plainness will do, she said. Mrs. Weller nodded once. The eldest girl has your look about the eyes when she is displeased. That is unfortunate for the world, Della said. To her surprise, Mrs. Weller smiled. By high summer the ranch no longer felt like a place that had made room for extra souls. It felt like a place built in that shape from the start and only lately grown into itself. Tansy kept a little garden bed of her own near the porch, all hollyhocks and onions in practical company. Nels was finally allowed to help with the gentler horses and came in every evening smelling of sun and leather with an importance too large for his body. Minna learned to whistle through her teeth before she learned to braid evenly, which seemed fitting. And Emmett, who had once lived in that house as a man careful not to ask too much of it, came home now with the gate latch lifting before he reached it because someone inside had been watching for him. Once, near the end of harvest, Della found Alma's letter again where Emmett kept it in the drawer beside the bed. She did not mean to pry. She had only been looking for darning wool. But there it lay, folded soft at the creases from being opened and refolded many times. That evening, after the children were down and the lamplight had gone low, she asked, "Do you still need it?" Emmett sat back in his chair, considering. "Not the way I did." "Then why keep reading it?" He looked toward the dark window where their reflections sat faint on the glass beside the room behind them. Because a man can spend so many years believing he was kept on sufferance that even after he is told otherwise, part of him waits for the correction. Della laid her mending in her lap. And does the correction come? Less often now. She crossed the room and stood beside him. He took her hand as simply as if they had been married 20 years instead of a few months. "You were never kept on sufferance," she said. He looked up at her then, and the old loneliness in him, never gone entirely, perhaps never gone in any person, had somewhere gentler to rest. The years did what years always do. They marked the doorframe with children's growth. They silvered Otto's beard and stooped Reverend Baines's shoulders. They gave Louise a wife from Thermopolis who laughed loud enough to startle hens. They brought statehood talk and new roads and the first catalog from farther east than anyone had used for. They also brought sicknesses survived, calves lost in bad weather, one barn roof blown half off in October, and 100 ordinary troubles that never make a legend yet fill a life honest and full. Tansy grew into a young woman with a clear gaze that made careless men choose their words better. Nels shot up all elbows first, and then all strength, as boys do. Minna never did lose the habit of climbing where she ought not, though she became graceful enough at it that Della worried less and pretended not to. Sometimes strangers still asked which children belonged to whom. In the early days that question had landed like a threat. Later it became only ignorance. Della would answer if she felt like it and decline if she did not. Emmett, for his part, took to saying, "They're ours," in a tone that ended curiosity or deserved to. And if one of those evenings should happen to find somebody listening from a farmhouse kitchen, a parked car, a back porch where the light had just begun to go, perhaps they would know already why such a simple answer mattered. The world spends a great deal of effort measuring blood, names, deeds, and right of claim. All useful things in their place. But a home is finally proved by who is still there when the weather turns. It was many years later, after Alma's quilt had been patched twice more and Minna's little whistle had long since disappeared into some crack of time, that a traveling salesman stopped at the ranch for water. He looked from one face to another, Tansy bringing in jars from the springhouse, Nels coming up from the lower field, Emmett on the porch rail with his hat tipped back, Della shelling beans into her apron, and made the mistake of trying to sort them aloud. "Now which of these are your own?" he asked with cheerful foolishness. Emmett did not so much as blink. "All of them," he said. That was the end of the matter. And the evening after the salesman had gone on down the road, the family sat under the cottonwoods while the last light thinned across the meadow and the creek moved easy through its banks, sounding as if it had all the time in the world. The boy looked at him with a face that had already learned not to expect much from men in hats. "No one has ever picked us," he said. "They pick one, maybe, or the little one, but not us." Across the room, A rancher in a black broadcloth vest was testing the arm of another orphan boy as if he were buying a mule. Near the pie table, two women pretended not to stare at the three children by the stove. The little girl with the ribbon kept one hand hooked into the older boy's coat seam. The smallest child had gone half asleep on her feet, and August, who had come into Juniper Crossing for lamp oil, horseshoes, and nothing more complicated than that, found himself looking at three children and understanding that if he stood up and walked away, somebody else would decide the shape of their lives before sundown. That was the question the evening set before him, plain as a gate in open country: whether a man who had barely managed his own life had any business laying a hand on three others and calling it help. The ladies' aid called it a placing supper because polite people liked a polite name for hard things. Families came. The preacher spoke. The county clerk kept notes, and children whose parents had died, vanished, or failed too publicly were sent where there was work and, if the Lord had been feeling generous, a little kindness besides. Most years August kept clear of it. He knew what it was. Everybody did. But Reverend Peel had asked him to carry in firewood from the side shed when he passed by the church, and August had said yes, because it was easier than saying no to a man who looked tired all the time. So he had walked in with pine splinters on his sleeves, seen the room, and stayed just long enough to wish he had not.